Hey,
Yes,
Mary
can you
Ann?
hear me? All right,
I sure
fantastic.
can.
Thanks so much, Sudi. And hi, everyone, and welcome to this webinar as part of the AEBG TAP project. I'm Mary Ann Fideli-McLeod with the American Institutes for Research, and I'm very pleased to be joined by our colleague Jacques Lecour from the Mid-Alameda County Consortium. Jacques will be picking up the webinar in about a half hour, and for the first half hour of the session, I'll be going through my portion of the presentation. So the intent of this webinar is to provide you all with some support in thinking about shared professional development through collaborative mechanisms for planning and conducting professional development. And this was decided as a topic since it is an element of the 2017-18 AEBG annual plan. What Jacques and I are going to present today are best practices, and that can guide you. And the main areas of our presentation will be on collaborative planning, which includes assessing professional learning needs, establishing priorities, and creating a plan that leverages resources and articulates how the consortium will meet needs. Collaborative professional learning methods that Jacques will be taking you through, and then supports, resources and requests for support from the AEBG TAP program. I'm reading the first part on the collaborative planning process. That looks really small and even on my computer, and so my guess is that many of you are not going to be able to see what's there. It is a screenshot from the Capital Adult Education Regional Consortium annual plan from 2015. I was the PD subcommittee lead for the effort to develop the response to Objective 6, and so many of the resources, the approach, and some of the resources I'll be sharing will be artifacts from that effort a couple of years ago. And with that, around collaborative planning, here are a few suggested methods for establishing what PD needs are in your consortium, and I'll be going through each one of these. So some ideas to begin the planning process and undertake the effort of executing the plan. Form a PD subcommittee, use the adult education teacher competencies and its self-assessment, conduct a survey of administrators and conduct a survey by functional role, which would include instructors, counselors, administrators, and whatever roles you consider essential to the functioning of your consortium, and engage with program area work groups. With that, before I go through each of these pieces, I have a couple of questions for you. And hopefully on your screen right now, well, that is a little hard to see. Let's see if I can make it bigger. Sudi, or one of our tech wizards, is it? No, I guess we can see it. I have two chat pods that are up now. The first is, how does your consortium identify PD needs among teachers? That is, it should be at the upper left of your screen, and then right next to it, what are the PD needs among your consortium's teacher workforce? I'm hoping we could take just a couple of minutes now for anyone on the webinar who would be good enough to contribute to please respond to those two questions. So how do you assess need, and then what do you know of that need? So let's say 1 minute or 2 minutes for response. say about another 30 or 40 seconds for responses, and I'm seeing that there's a number of you are already engaged in the methods that we're going to go over today, so I hope my session will provide some thinking, support you in your efforts. So Gonzalo from LAUSD says we've conducted teacher surveys across program areas. Carrie also identifies surveys. There are faculty requests. ESL Common Core, Cecilia, that's a subject of professional development, perhaps. The consortium makes recommendations, a lot of surveying, and work with work groups. Professional learning communities as a mechanism. That's great, Gina, and actually will be something that Jacques touches on later. And in terms of the teacher PD needs, student assessment, career planning, PD for new teachers, technology PD and student assessment, scope and sequence, common agreements of best practice, employability skills, below basic needs of the adult learner. And I'm just going to wrap up in a second, so if you are typing, give you just a moment. Learner persistence, post-secondary transition, CCRS, understanding the adult learner. Thank you, Christine. And IET, that's going to be a biggie probably for many other people. And I think with that, Gina, you're going to have our last word. I see you typing. Labor market demand and local demand. All right. Gina, you are still typing. You have a chance to hit enter. In just a couple of seconds, I will go back to the presentation. All right, thanks, Gina. Our school division makes PD available in various ways to meet the needs of teachers. Good, and I think there'll be some other opportunities in this chat for you all to share out those ideas. So collaborative planning, forming a PD subcommittee. Again, the basis of these ideas and suggestions are from the work I did as the PD subcommittee lead for the Capital Adult Education Regional Consortium. And so some considerations for forming the group. And I'm sure there's many others, and you all should feel free at any time to type into the general chat pod, and I'm going to keep an eye on that as well if you have questions or general comments. I'm going to try and keep an eye on that, and Sudie can ping me if there's something I've missed. So assure member institution representation. You may, the group may be a cross-program area group that then engages with program area work groups. So when we, for CARIC in our effort to develop the initial PD plan, our subcommittee was composed of folks who were experts in different areas and members of different work groups, and that, or program area work groups, I should say, and then that allowed us to have our PD subcommittee members go back and liaise with those program area work groups. So I think at the time it set up a good consistency and sort of assured that whatever we were doing in the PD subcommittee wasn't at cross purposes or somehow in conflict with the plans being made by the program area work groups. It would be good to include a consortium leader, a director, a coordinator, just for the simple reason that it's somebody with a who can pull the levers to make things happen and help establish parameters. So I think for us it was a good exercise to have that leadership a part of our subcommittee so that we didn't make plans that were not achievable for the consortium, or sort of were, again, sort of at cross purposes with the wider plans for the consortium. And establishing a purpose and parameters for the subcommittee to operate. Some of the functions which would help then define the parameters are the PD subcommittee could support the consortium in establishing PD needs, creating a plan and executing that plan over time, and can engage with program area work groups to be sure that PD plans align with needs of the program areas. So it's really important to have a good, coherent PD plan that that engagement is occurring with the program areas. And I got to my chat a little sooner in this session, so I'm skipping over that slide. So, to the question of whether you form a PD subcommittee or not in order to plan for professional learning, you want to know something of the needs for professional development. One tool, and there's others, but this is one that is available to everyone. It's publicly available in a high-quality document, are the adult education teacher competencies, which identify the core knowledge and skills expected of any adult education teacher. The competencies support effective teaching practices and enhanced learning outcomes for all adult education learners, and the competencies assist instructional leaders, professional developers, and teacher preparation and planning for professional learning. The adult ed teacher competencies was a project undertaken by the American Institutes for Research. I had happened to be the project director for that, and they are publicly available documents. We went through a very rigorous development process and a national validation, and those competencies are all publicly, freely available on the LINCS website. And Judy, I'm wondering, because you're good at it, if you wouldn't mind in the general chat pod putting in the link. Thank you, Melinda, you got to it first. The link to the teacher competencies. So again, free and publicly available. The teacher competencies are structured to go from big to small, sort of gross to very refined. So the domains are the biggest, the broadest areas of activity that any adult education teacher would engage in: monitoring and managing student learning and performance through data, planning and delivering high-quality evidence-based instruction, effectively communicating to motivate and engage learners, and pursuing professionalism and continually building knowledge and skills. So within those 4 domains, there are 17 individual competencies, and I'll take a look at those in a second. But in short, what those competencies do is they're written to be something that is observable or demonstrable, and they represent the knowledge and skills and abilities that an adult ed instructor should possess to be effective within one of those 4 domains. Each domain has about 4 or 5 competencies. Each competency has a performance indicator. So if this is basically the idea is if this is what I need to know and do, well, what does it look like when I do it? And how do I know that I'm doing it? So each one of the 17 competencies has a set of performance indicators. Here's what it looks like in action. And then we include sample illustrations. And the sample illustrations are there to give an example of this competency actually performed in a setting. So we had a panel of expert teachers who helped us create the sample illustrations for the competencies. This is just this will be on the website that Melinda is sending you to. There is a sort of interactive graphic for the competencies. It's just the same thing I just went over. This is what these are the 17 competencies associated in each of the 4 domains. You'll see domain 1 has 4. Domain 2, plan and deliver high-quality evidence-based instruction, which is, I guess, the heart of teacher practice, has 5 competencies, and there's 4 each in domains 3 and 4. And I could give just a moment for you to, before I go on, to just look at those. And I'll say this about it. The domain 1, the big idea behind each domain is that before you plan instruction, you know something about your students. And the idea is that there's a utilization of different data sources, and that a very important source of information is learner needs and goals. So what your learners tell you about what they need. Once you have an idea of their needs and goals, utilizing summative and formative assessment data to understand their progress in reaching those goals. The big idea behind domain 2 is if you have data sources, you can plan instruction. And that instruction, this is item 2.1, should be learner-centered. So you're using what's known about what's effective practice with adult learners, or andragogy. For those of you who are sort of steeped in the world of adult education. So what works best when you have an adult learner? Using standards so that when you are planning for instruction, there's a baseline of, and in California, many of you are using the College and Career Readiness Standards, and maybe some of you have begun to use the English Language Proficiency Standards. I think Jacques is going to touch on those a bit more. Using instructional techniques that are effective, designing instruction to build technology and media literacy skills, and I think maybe most importantly to the contemporary job market is designing instruction to build learners' higher order thinking skills, problem-solving skills, communication skills. The third domain is about working with adults in a way that motivates them to persist and continue through their education in a way that is unique and is I guess, an art and science that is learned over time and distinct from working with children in a K-12 setting. Domain 4, pursuing professionalism and continually building knowledge and skill. The idea of this domain is that we're all always learning and have more to learn, and part of a best teacher practice is embracing that and planning for it in a meaningful way associated with the goals and the vision, the mission, vision, and goals of the system. And I don't see any questions, so I will go on. Again, from the link that Melinda provided, I think you could get to this. This is that interactive graphic. Just makes there's a lot of stuff in the Word document that's available. So this interactive graphic just, I think, breaks it down a little bit more. So here's our first domain, monitor and manage data. This is our third competency, monitors learning through summative and formative assessment data. And then below that is the performance indicator. So what does it look like to monitor learning through summative and formative assessment data? It means I use a variety of formative assessments, such as classroom observations, lesson closure discussions, portfolios, quizzes, student error logs, and many other things to monitor learning and adjust instruction. And so the competencies are in written textual form. To have them be a useful tool to assess need, there's also a self-assessment tool. There's a question for each competency. It's interactive there, and I'll just maybe skip to it in a second. But the idea is that there's 3 columns that you're using, and so associated with each competency, you're answering questions about, is this relevant to my teaching? What is my own level of proficiency? Am I really good at it? Is this something I think I need to work on? And is it a program priority level? And so based on that self-scoring, you'll get a score that helps you identify your top few priorities. Those things with the highest score are the things you may want to focus on for your PD. And this is an example with that link for this tool. So again, a public domain, please download it. Feel free to use it. Feel free to get in touch if you want, if you have questions about the competencies or the use of the self-assessment tool. A practice that I know many programs engage in is at the beginning of a year, before the year starts, using the self-assessment tool and looking for the common areas of need and having that be a focus of professional development. So that is a way a consortium team could use the competencies in the self-assessment tool. We all, whatever relevant teacher user group uses the self-assessment, we take a look at, here's the 3 things that look like the common or the areas of greatest need, and therefore that becomes one of the bases of our PD plan. If there are no questions, I will go on. So other ways of assessing professional learning need, and a number of you are already doing this, creating a survey. So create a simple, easy to complete survey. It can be conducted at a face-to-face consortium-wide event. It can be sent to program area work groups. It can be developed by functional role, which I'll show you an example of in a moment. And it can be sent to member program staff using an online tool such as SurveyMonkey. or any other survey tool. So what does it mean to have a survey sample by functional role? Program administrator, instructor, counselor, etc. This example is one that we developed for the AEBG TAP project. So maybe some of you have already seen it, but the basic idea is to identify a few areas that you as PD leads can identify in advance, or they're associated with the grant, and then sending it out to the relevant staff, and then looking for trends. I'm just going to Gonzalo writes, in the proficiency level, is very proficient rated as 1. Seems counterintuitive. Like I said, I would be happy to chat through with you, Gonzalo, or really anyone, or we could do a follow-up session on the use of this tool to make it be more digestible. I think there's a lot, Gonzalo, to look at, and so we've heard that before, and so we've offered professional development on use of these tools. Okay, so in terms of using I'll just go back one, a survey like this, one of the advantages to it, it's multiple choice questions, and therefore it makes analysis easier. You just quantify the most commonly selected priorities. So if you're going to be doing a consortium, you have a big consortium, there's a lot of people to survey, a survey tool like this might be the right one for you, just because it will make analysis and quantifying things easier later. I think one of the downsides of this is if you're doing the pre-selected items, it's making sure that the multiple choices are the right multiple choices, and that what you write as the multiple choice would be understood by who's ever checking it off. I think that's the challenge of surveys like this. Is when I say engagement with agency leadership, for example, I think I know what I meant by it, but is the person checking it off, is that their idea? But again, it's good for a large sample size. Establishing PD priorities. This is a screenshot from the publicly available Capital Adult Education Regional Consortium regional plan. Excuse me. And we did this as the part of our effort at the first PD plan, which is why you'll see objectives 6.1 and 6.2. And so what we had, and this was formed the basis of the survey, and so we asked open-ended questions for folks to respond to. So the item 6.1, you guys will all recognize this, and 6.2 became the basis of the questions that we asked, and then we allowed any response, just a narrative written response back with no pre-selected items. These types of open-ended questions, the upside is it gives you a better understanding of nuance, because you could read individual responses. It's good for a smaller sample size. So if you're expecting only to hear back from 20, 30, 40 folks, you would get a good sense of the nuanced identified need of who's ever responding. The downside is that the analysis, the bigger the sample, the more people who've completed this, the harder it gets to sort through. And Christine from Solano writes, can you share that survey with other consortia? If you're, yeah, I think I can do that. And if you go to the website that's listed, that gives again, the sort of publicly available plan, and if you just go to Objective 6, Christine, and everybody, you'll see the full sort of narrative response which described our method. In our case, since we decided to go with an open-ended response, one of the things you can do with that, if you have a larger sample size, is to create a methodology for Analyzing, what are we looking for? If we have a bunch of people who are all going to read through this, how do we know we're looking for the same thing? And so in our case, we looked for a few things: themes, trends, and convergences. And when we looked for those themes, these were the 5 themes that came up most often in writing. Collaboration, so again, this was the inaugural year of the consortium, so collaboration, opportunities to work together. Evidence-based best practice, pathways and alignment, instruction for post-secondary skills development, and technology integration. Once we had those themes down, the subcommittee got together and said, okay, if we know that these are what our consortium members indicated they want, what's our plan? How do we create a plan? And so we laid out a few questions for ourselves to answer. And those questions were, well, how will all program areas be addressed through PD? How can existing PD strategies be leveraged for CARIC as a whole? What field experts or subject matter experts can be brought in to support CARIC? How can PD be delivered? What modalities? Face-to-face, online, like we're doing today, something different? How can effective PD methods be implemented given the makeup of CARIC? So there's some big city centers, right? We're in Sacramento. And then I forget how, I'm sure one of my SCOE colleagues can quickly write in how many counties are involved, but we have a lot of folks in rural areas. So what would work given the makeup of the system? How can CARIC support the coordination of delivery of PD? And how can we capitalize on consortium structure to support PD? And so that was our process. Let's find out in a very open-ended way what folks want and need. Let's have a process to identify priorities based on those responses. And then if those are our responses, how do we come up with a plan that addresses them? And it was answering these questions that took us to our planning. And Christine and anyone else, this is, I believe, also available through the website that Sudhi put up. So this was our response. If this is the need, and this is what exists, and this is what we need to do, it was the process we undertook at the time to establish the plan. And with that, I am uncharacteristically right on time. But does anybody have any questions for me? Okay. Then I will hand it. CARIC has 4 counties. Thank you, Holly, Amador, Sacramento, Yolo, and El Dorado. Okay, so I will keep an eye on the chat pod. Please feel free to get in touch if you have some questions about the competencies or anything else. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jacques to discuss methods for delivering collaborative professional development. Jacques, thank you for being a part of this today.
Great, thank you, Mary Ann. And I'd like to start by talking just a bit about some background and context for the main part of what's going to follow in the closing part of today's presentation. There are professional learning standards that are very important and very helpful for reference and to act upon. We're going to take a quick look at those. And as a reminder of what brings us together, the AEDG documents say what the professional development focus areas are in various places. And so I've made an attempt to put them together in a single slide so that we can be on the same page regarding what some of the targets are for this endeavor. So to start off, I'd like to either remind folks or point out to folks that an organization called Learning Forward has done an excellent job of developing and disseminating standards for professional learning. And I think they are extremely helpful to get teams on the same page about the whats and the whys and the wherefores regarding professional learning. So I'm just going to say a couple of words about each one of these 7 standards. Let's see, now I'm seeing in the chat pod that the audio is unclear. Let's see. Oh, much better now. Okay. All right, good. All right. Let's continue then. So one of the standards is that learning communities is an extremely important factor in quality professional learning. A core element of learning communities is alignment. It's one of the key expected targets and outcomes for a learning community. So in the world of AEDG, it's really a perfect match. Leadership is another key standard, and a key element of that standard is infrastructure and support systems, meaning that the leadership responsible for taking a key role in the support for professional learning looks at that effort as a long-term sustainable infrastructure as opposed to kind of a one-shot initiative or activity. The third standard is resources, and a key element of that standard is that professional development is prioritized, that the resources are there to support it in a sustainable, meaningful way, that it's not an afterthought, it's not considered a luxury, it's considered an integral and essential part of what we do as educators. The fourth standard is data, and there are many, many elements to that standard, but I think a core element to keep in mind is that assessing progress is essential, and it's assessing progress on 2 strands. The progress that students are making as a result of the implementation of professional learning, and the progress that teachers are making in terms of their own learning. And as Marianne said, not limited to teachers, but any functional role group that is taking on a professional development initiative. The design principle, or standard number 5, is also another absolutely critical thing to attend to. And one of the key elements of design is active engagement of the participants, so that there is not some external dish handed to the group, that the design is an output of the active engagement of the group right from the outset, just as Marianne was explaining and giving illustrations of, with the very early level of engagement of everyone involved in the professional development activity. Implementation is really a key element also, and the application of research on change is something that is critical to pay attention to. It's really helpful for the participants to understand and appreciate that it takes time for change to set in and to have the desired effects. And it's important to commit to implementation long enough for the change to have an effect. And then finally, an outcomes focus. This has to do with a coherence between the outcomes focus for students and the outcomes focus for instructors. So I'd like to point out that at the end, you'll get a link these standards, and I encourage you and your teams to spend a little time reviewing them together. It really just helps get people on the same page regarding professional learning. The second part of the background I'd like to share has to do with what the AEDG documentation, the legislation, and some of the policy papers that have been released have to say in terms of what areas of professional development are key. And so I won't read them to you. You're probably all very familiar with these. I put them up here more as a reminder of what some of the highlights are in terms of where professional development is supposed to go. And I always like to settle on improving student outcomes as the key focus area, the ultimate focus area. It seems that if there is a clear focus on that, then the other pieces tend to fall into place. And then when we talk about collaboration, I think it's also advisable for learning teams to spend at least a little bit of time talking about what collaboration means. I think it's a term that is too easy to assume as understood the same way by all. And in professional learning, it really does have some rather specific attributes. And again, I won't read them to you, but if your team is collaborating on these things and in these ways, then your level of collaboration is more professional than it would otherwise be. So it's really critical to at least take a look and give yourselves an occasional reminder on exactly what it is that supports really, really good collaboration. The term professional learning communities is bandied about quite a bit. It seems to be something that lots of districts and consortia and learning teams aspire to be. And it's kind of easy to get off track because there are a lot of variations on the theme. So this is a set of questions that very simply sums up what a professional learning community does. And I offer this as a reminder, and again, something that I think is really worth visiting and revisiting every once in a while as a way to monitor and assess the work that teams are doing and to make sure that your teams are really getting to the heart of the matter in professional development, at really, really focusing on students. So doing what a professional learning community does in a very straightforward way is a really good recipe for success. So at this point, I'd like to take a minute or two to hear from you. In your consortia, what's working? What's yielding good results, either in terms of student outcomes, teacher outcomes, or positive collaboration? If you could share some of those bits of information, I'd appreciate that. And then on the flip side, what areas are a bit of a challenge in your consortium professional development activities? So please share, and if you can connect any of the ideas in terms of the principles and the professional learning community practices to what you're doing as you're responding, that I would appreciate that. So let's give a minute or two for folks to respond. thank you for sharing these ideas. So what's working? Dana says organizing regional trainings, inviting consortium members, great way to get folks from different sites and areas together. ESL PD provided by the community college, great. Carrie, subject matter expert work groups to collaborate. Yes, it's a great opportunity if you've got enough of a quorum in a particular subject matter to get those folks together and really let them dig in with experts. Gonzalo, LA is in year 2 of the ESL PLC, year 1 of CTE, next to kickoff for ABB. Great. Nice to be able to have separate PLCs for each content here. Okay. Tom, regular meetings with members in the consortia and members willing to support one another. Paige, consortium members sharing experience and best practices. Great. Teachers train teachers from Anna. That's a really good next step that moves a lot closer to implementation as a standard practice. That's great. And Gina, PLCs, CTE PLCs, ESL PLCs, successful. More teachers are collaborating on a regular basis. But, thank you for sharing that, Gina. It's really, really important to view the process as something that is ongoing and cyclical, and that's very, very critical to get the kinds of outcomes that you want. So let's go to the flip side of the coin here and see where folks see opportunities to improve sharing of information from conferences, workshops, trainings, etc. Nationwide. What are some strategies to share information? Christine, that's a great question. I will just throw out one idea and invite other folks to respond to Christine as well. One idea is some kind of a document or folder that is accessible to the members of your consortium so that they can place items there that they want to share and access resources that are shared by others. That's just one idea. I'm sure there are many others. Paige points out the challenge of finding time, always such a major issue to contend with. Carrie, participation by all member districts by trying to get everyone on board. Cecilia, logistics are a problem. Areas, schedule, only Saturdays work. Yeah, that can be a bit of pulling teeth to get everyone at one place at the same time. Gonzalo, subject matter expert work groups are struggling to define pathways. Interesting. Okay. Gonzalo, maybe one of the bits of a process that I'm going to go into in a couple of minutes might be applicable to address that. Dana, scheduling concerns. Yeah, right there to go again. That same bugaboo issue that seems to bite everybody. Consortial level meetings focusing more on instruction and outcome and deprivatizing practice. Yes. Just to start a PLC and Dana, agencies using different curriculum and materials. Yes. And how do you make sense out of the differences, align them in a meaningful way, and figure out what to focus on. Those are some challenges that arise from the curricula that seem, at least on the surface, to be really different. Thank you very much, everyone, for participating there. And let's see. Let's take a look now at sort of an idealized professional development project. And I'm going to use writing as an example of content or student skill focus in these examples. I'm going to go kind of slowly through the first example, the content-alike example, imagining that there is a group of ESL instructors focusing on writing. And after that, I'm going to go rather quickly through a cross-content example because the process is identical from one to the other with a little bit of a variation on in the second example. But let's dive into the content-alike example. And I hope that the participants will see the connections between some of the steps and processes and resources that Marianne shared in the first half of this webinar to the process that I'm going to describe here. There's a lot of correspondence and overlap, so please understand that these are very mutually complementary and not really sequential, not doing the pre-planning aspect of the teacher competencies project as a separate and distinct activity from doing the process that I'm going to describe now. So looking at what the data say is a really, really important starting point. And the best data is student work, looking directly at student work and comparing that to standards. And it's really, really critical to anchor work in standards. That helps address part of the issue that Dana just brought up about everyone having different curricula. It's okay to have different curricula. There should be an addressing of standards in the curricula. The addressing of the standards can happen in varying ways, and that's okay. But working towards student attainment of the same standards is critical, and that's what holds the teams together, and that's what allows teams to focus on particular ways to help students improve. So you look at the data, and you look at any quantitative data you have, you look at student work, compare that to standards, and then for each level, and again, we're talking about writing now, you would agree on student writing expectations, and you would create a continuum. The continuum would be a set of skills from the lowest proficiency level to the highest proficiency level, and it would show student learning expectations from one level to another, building to the ultimate set of skills that you want students to leave with when they exit the program or transition to a next level program. And then instructors would complete a KWL chart. For those of you who aren't familiar with that or haven't seen that for a while, that's so a teacher would say, here's what I already know relative to teaching writing. W is want to know. Here's what I want to know relative to teaching writing. And the L is something that gets completed towards the or during the professional learning initiative or afterwards to show what teachers learned about teaching writing as a result of taking part in the process. And this is really just a KWL chart is a quick and dirty variation of that beautiful, rich self-assessment tool that Marianne spent a little time describing earlier here. So if you had a project and the teachers did the self-assessment tool, there would be no need to do a KWL chart. So it's kind of the same thing. But what that does is allow for individual teachers to reflect on and identify what their needs are, to take the sum of individual teachers' needs and look at that in a comprehensive way to see what the collective needs are, and then to make decisions about how to move forward to address the collective needs of teachers. And that would means selecting instructional strategies and resources to review, to learn, to focus on after you have identified. I want to say that, that as I looked at my own notes here, I wish I had put another step between 3 and 4 because it's assumed in 3, but perhaps it is not explicit enough. Sometimes when we look at a professional learning cycle, the question is, where is the professional development? This is all a lot of really good activity, but where does the teacher learning come in? So I'm actually going to go back to and look at number 3. So here, where it says select instructional strategies and resources to you learn and focus on, that is where the team decides how it's going to learn what it needs to. So if, since this example is framed in writing, you could say that the teachers decided they wanted to study a particular writing process program together. And that could be done in study sessions, be done in online learning. You could bring in a presenter, an external presenter. You could have an in-house expert or set of instructors who have good knowledge on the topic. They could be the presenter. You could do mentoring. You could do any number of things that makes sense to meet the differentiated needs of new instructors, veteran instructors, everyone in between. So this is where you have the opportunity to decide how the teacher learning is going to take place. So I wanted to back up to make sure that that was explicitly stated. So after some learning has taken place, it's really important to return to this notion of collaboration and to do this particular collaborative activity, and that is to plan lessons on writing and to either develop or select assessments and rubrics to monitor student work. And it is absolutely critical that this be a part of the process because you're going to come back a step or two later and you're going to analyze student work together as a means of determining progress. And if you haven't done step 4 and you don't have lessons and assessments that have been collaboratively planned, then you're going to be comparing apples to oranges instead of apples to apples. So that is a really critical step there. So let's say you've got plans and lessons and assessments in place. You implement, everybody teaches and assesses, everybody brings back student work in number 6 and analyzes it again. And the question there, of course, is to what degree are students learning what we expected them to learn? What's working in our instruction to contribute to that? Where do we need to clean things up a little bit? And then in step 7, you adjust the plans and the instruction, and you go back again and you implement the refined lesson plans and maybe refined assessments as well. If you were doing writing across content areas, you would follow the same process, but the difference would be that you would probably not focus on aspects of writing the way subject matter alike teachers would. You would focus on writing in a more general way. So because you would have teachers from different content areas all involved in the same project, and they're coming at it from different backgrounds and experiences and needs in terms of their students and their own teaching. So a focus here might be on something like a general strategy that everyone can use and still see a continuum of student development and student skill. So it might be something like focusing on revision, focusing on journal writing or free writing. It could be something like developing meaningful prompts that generate more engaged and effective writing. It could be something like how to give actionable feedback to students on writing. But so again, the difference would be in item number 2, or item number 3, sorry, select the instructional strategies. The instructional strategies would probably be more generally applicable across content areas rather than singularly specific to an ESL class. So I'm not going to go through the rest of the steps in the interest of time. They're the same as steps in the ESL-specific example. And those steps are reflected in this chart, the teaching and learning cycle, focusing on data, deciding what kinds of teacher learning needs to take place, selecting instructional strategies, planning the assessments and the lesson plans, and then putting them into practice in the classroom, getting some feedback on how they're working, adjusting based on the feedback, with the feedback including the student work and what's reflected in the student work, and feedback from colleagues on the student learning and what's working and what's not working according to their observations. I just want to point out a few tried and true, very high reward activities that really help contribute to success for professional learning. Simply applying the PLC standards and processes as much as possible is really helpful. I can't overemphasize the importance of anchoring your work in standards. That's what really keeps teams focused on the same goals and outcomes for students. Often we think that we have to use only research or only evidence-based practices or only professional wisdom. It's really important to use as much of all 3 of those resources as possible to generate the best results. Co-developing and co-teaching lessons is one of the ultimate types of activities that yield really, really great results for teachers and for students. There's a particular protocol called lesson study, and at the end you'll see a link to some lesson study materials for those of you who want to dig into that a little bit more. Developing and using common formative assessments, using data, looking at student work, and then, as someone mentioned earlier in the chat pod, visiting colleagues' classes, the deprivatization of teaching is really, really important and critical to excellent collaboration. So I think we have hit the end of our time. I might need some guidance from my colleagues here to see if we want to go over a little bit or if we should just go to the information about resources at the end.
Well, thank you, Jacques. As always, this very rich discussion and presentation. I think on behalf of the AEBG Technical Assistance Project, I would love to know what questions and comments you have, because that will really help us as we get it into high gear in terms of planning more professional development and technical assistance. So, Sudi, if you wouldn't mind taking us to the chat pod, and if those of you were right at 2 o'clock, the end time, so if you need to go, we would understand, but we'd also really appreciate if you wouldn't mind answering these 2 questions. What questions and comments do you have about today's session or any of the resources that we brought up, and what from today's session might you consider applying? What are you interested in? So whatever you leave us with would be helpful. And how about we give everyone, Jacques, just a minute. If you could stand staying a minute past time.
Thanks, Marianne.
Please feel free to type, everyone. Okay, so thank Paige, you are very welcome. Dana asks, what other resources do we have to develop and work with our PLCs? We've been to the PLC Institute, it's awesome. Maybe other regional trainings. I think that's something, professional learning communities is something we hear back a lot. I'll be speaking with Diana Batista and Daryl Parsons at the AEBG TAP project. I'm glad you felt it was valuable, Christine and Gonzalo. I think the PowerPoint is available for you to download from this meeting, and we included a lot of the various links. I'm just going to go to the other chat pod as well. I can see using the teacher competency self-assessment. Absolutely, and again, that could be a focus of professional development we offer through AEBG TAP. I'm also happy to talk with anyone anytime about the competencies. And Dana writes, we'll need to figure out a way to get instructors and leaders in program areas together to collaborate. Yes, and I hope that something of today was helpful. And Dana, if you feel like there's something the AEBG TAP project can do to help that, we would love to hear it. Paige writes a designated work group schedule for professional development. Yes, please feel free to use whatever processes we described today. We're going to have to part soon, but I do want to note, and Sudie, you could probably hear me, if you wouldn't mind going, putting the description of the August 2nd webinar into a format that everyone can see, I would be, oh, thank you, Sudie. So on August 2nd, there's going to be another webinar. It's going to be led by Charisse Moore of the American Institutes for Research, along with Alexander Dane from Spark Policy Institute, Steve Curiel from Huntington Beach Adult School, and Valentina Pertel from the North Orange County Community College District. So there, Sudie just put up the description, so we hope to see you at the August 2nd webinar. The title is Getting the Most Out of Leveraging Resources, and so it's a focus on braiding and leveraging, braiding funds and resources to achieve program goals. Thank you so much, Sudie, and I'm going to go back to the presentation, see if that got me to the right place. For your technical assistance, consortium's technical assistance needs, please use this link. It will take you to a Contact Us page that will get you to the Sacramento County Office of Education staff who lead the AEBG TAP project, and we would love to hear from you. And in addition, you will have this website when you download the PowerPoint. Here are some links to some of the other items that we spoke about today for which a link was not already provided. So with that, I would like to say thank you on behalf of AEBG TAP and the American Institutes for Research. Jacques, thank you, as always, for being a part of our efforts and a great colleague to work with. So thank you, and thanks, everyone.
Good luck, everybody.
Okay, bye now. Thanks, everyone.